my name is Ksenia Turkova. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me distract you a little bit from the politics and political linguistics, and let's talk about pure language and about our attitude to the language rules and the grammar as well. You know, when I lived in Russia as a linguist and a journalist, I used to write a lot about how people define love to their language. And I figured out that for a lot of people, language is associated only with rules. Moreover, those people think that the more you love language, the more you hate those who dare to break the rules. And very often in Russia and actually in Ukraine as well, you can meet people who are even aggressive, and they would judge you if you mispronounce the word because they do not accept variants. For example, in Russian, you can say the word cottage cheese in two different ways. You can say tvorog and you can say tvarog, and either one wouldn't be a mistake, but people want only one answer. For some reason, that's very important for them. I was very curious if that approach exists in the United States, and today I'm going to talk to a famous grammarian, the founder of Grammar Table. You've probably heard about that, and the author of this book, Rebel with a Clause, Ellen Jovin. Ellen, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Ksenia. It's nice to be here.
So first of all, I really enjoyed your book. It's very informative, and at the same time, it's light and funny, and I like it very much. And you know, it's very human. Why do you think most linguists have this human approach? As I noticed, it's my opinion, have this human approach to the language, and ordinary speakers do not have that. They always want to protect language from something.
Well, there's such a mix of attitudes towards language across the United States, in my experience. And just to be clear for everyone, I'm not a linguist, but I have studied a lot of languages, and I'm a writer. I am a grammarian, but I think when people think of that word, they think of the rule person. And I don't think of myself as a rule person, but I do think of myself as a very careful editor of what I send out in the world, because I want it to be as clear and easily received as possible by the people who examine it. Um, in the U.S., I find that linguistic attitudes from linguistics seem increasingly to be entering public awareness. So there's it's hard for me to judge, because when I was a kid, I was just a kid. So I didn't know what was happening all over the country. But it seems to me that generally attitudes towards language are softening. A lot of students take linguistics courses or courses that are influenced by linguistics ideas. And so they're more aware than we might have been as kids in my generation about language variety, language evolution, language politics. So for me, it's a more diverse discussion than it was 30 years ago.
But have you ever noticed that people who are linguists, who are grammarians, who are specialists, they tolerate more in language than just regular people?
That does happen a lot. And I think part of it is because if you work professionally with language, you just have a broader reach. Your language pool expands because you're exposed to people beyond your immediate geography and demographic. And so you become aware that, like for example, on Twitter, I'm exposed to Englishes from all over the world all the time. So if I post a question about, that's grounded in American English, I'm not going to get just answers from American English speakers unless I say American English only. And I don't tend to do that because I like to hear all the different ways. Like, for example, a preposition. Some people say different to, some people say different from, some people say different than, and many people object violently to the than, which I don't. So you never know what you're going to get.
I mentioned already that in Russia, Russian speakers always want to protect their language from something. For example, to protect their language from the English language, from the influence of English language. Is there something American people want to protect English language from?
Yeah, I encounter that kind of protective stance more among people who they're trying to protect English as it was in the class that they remember from 1976 when they had Mrs. Smith for their English teacher. English has so many influences that it's so absorbent of other languages that I don't really see that, the opposition to the encroachment of other languages so much. I think it's funny sometimes I see debates about how to deal with words from other languages in English, especially French, because some people think, you should pronounce it closer to the French, and that's an
Mhm.
abomination if you don't protect the language of origin. I'm trying to think of a good word right now, but I'm just actually drawing a blank about what comes up the most. Anyway,
Yeah, but in Russia they talk a lot about protecting Russian language from the English language, from the influence and from the words. But it's inevitable because it's a global language, and it's very difficult to create your own words instead of English ones. For example, they were trying to create a word selfie, something instead of selfie, which is international word, but they failed because the word was so like weird and funny, and nobody wanted to use it.
what was the word?
Себяшка.
Well, it's sort of cool sounding to me. But why do you think people didn't like it? I'm just curious.
Because it sounds silly.
I can't really tell, but I do know that engineering language choices in a culture doesn't work very well.
I know in Lithuania they tried to do the same thing with selfie, and it also didn't go well. People didn't accept it. So selfie is selfie everywhere.
You know what's funny? I don't even really like the word. I don't like the way it sounds or feels. It feels so self-absorbed. Just the word by itself. So I do use it, but I find that I don't actually even like it. So it's funny that it's one that has really spread to the extent that it has.
I have mentioned already that strict attitude towards language in Russia when people uh, want other people to pronounce or to spell some words only in one way. They don't accept variants. Does it exist in the United States?
It definitely does, but it's always a losing battle. An example of a word that people do get kind of upset about is the word nuclear, which the second President Bush used to pronounce, or still does, I assume, pronounce nuclear. And if you look the word up, and which doesn't really correspond to the way it's spelled so much, and people who don't like nuclear really dislike nuclear. I don't care for it personally, but it's used by quite a few people. So I wish people would just mellow out a little bit and recognize how much variety they already are exposed to. Often we fixate on one particular word that really bugs us, but there are a whole bunch of others that people pronounce differently. Another example is err, ERR, which a lot of people pronounce as in the verb for error, commit an error. There's a verb ERR. So some people say some people say err, and then usually the two sides really dislike the other version. So there's no winning.
By the way, about the presidents, Mikhail Gorbachev made a lot of mistakes in pronunciation. He mispronounced a lot of words, and he had a very specific manner of speech. Which had its advantages and disadvantages, but since he was an influential figure, he was a president. People started pronounce the words the way he pronounced them. And it was a very interesting thing. And that's what I wanted to ask you. Is it essential for the Americans that the president speaks without mistakes?
Well, if it is, we have a problem because it doesn't really happen. Just as an example, this isn't a pronunciation thing, but it's a pronoun case thing. And I think these are always interesting for people who are native speakers of Slavic languages, where you have so many cases and you really think about this automatically. Like I sometimes tell American English speakers, if you need to figure out whether to use me or I in a sentence, ask someone who speaks speaks Russian or Polish or Ukrainian, because they just can tell right away. I'm talking about things like he called John and I. You know, a lot of native English speakers will say he called John and I instead of he called John and me, because they won't recognize that that's an object form.
Yes, I think I was confused when I just moved to the United States. I made this mistake.
Wait. Oh, did you say John and I?
Yes, I said no. I said John and me.
But you were right. That's fine.
Seriously, but people corrected me.
Yeah, but this is, well, it's a interesting question for linguists, because if people really want to say John and I, then I guess part of the linguistic argument is, well, maybe that's fine. Maybe you can sort of understand why they're considering it as like a unit, and you don't apply the case across to the second element. I don't know, but I would always say he called John and me, and if people ask me, I'll correct them about that. But I would guess that half the people think you're wrong if you're right, and half the people think you're right if you're wrong. That all the presidents I can remember, going back multiple decades, have at least once that I've noticed used I instead of me when they wanted the object case for the pronoun. That was my point, that that's so common. So I don't, correct. Not everyone's going to do everything technically right all the time. I teach corporate writing classes. Sometimes I teach grammar classes to adults. And it's the people who come from particular language backgrounds who always get those questions right, where the American English speakers are always trying to turn everything into I or myself rather than me, because they have this superstition that me is a bad thing. You're not supposed to say me and John went to the movies in formal English. That's something I wouldn't recommend. But then they apply it to every part of the sentence. And yeah, I could spend a lot of time on that.
And there is another very interesting topic. Should we correct each other when we make mistakes? I know the answer is no. You shouldn't correct like your friends. You shouldn't correct the strangers. You should correct people only if they asked you about that. But when I was reading your book, I was surprised that you're right about that, because I was thinking that it was some kind of a Soviet or post-Soviet phenomenon, because in post-Soviet countries it's normal to correct each other, not only in language. For example, a stranger can tell you on the street, like your child, watch better your child, or put a hat on your child because it's cold outside. So people give you unwanted advice all the time and about language as well, but I didn't know it existed in the United States.
As far as correcting people, yes, my attitude is that if you're in a party, for example, it's not polite to say to someone that you're in a conversation with five other people that he just used the wrong pronoun case. That's just not that's not good etiquette. People do that. Or also another thing that some Americans fixate on is whether you use a regular pronoun or a possessive in front of a gerund. For example, thank you wait, I appreciate you helping me, or I appreciate your helping me. That's the kind of thing some people will correct people about. I mean, I typically say you're there, but you see a lot of variety across English dialects with that, more than people realize, I think. So I think it's okay if it's, your child or your employee and you want to help them with development. I don't think it's with language development. I mean, it's useful to get that input from your family members or your boss, but just randomly at parties, it's pretty obnoxious. And the other thing is, the people who do the correcting are often wrong. They often don't remember the grammar right, or they have too rigid an idea of how language can be used. And so they're often picking on things that really don't matter.
Now let's talk about the punctuation. I read about the Oxford comma in your book, and realized that Americans love to fight over punctuation more than over spelling. Why?
I think that's right. I think that's right. You don't use the do you use the Oxford comma? You don't, right?
No, we don't use it.
I find it fascinating that Americans are so well, not just Americans, probably plenty of other English speakers around the world too, but this is where I get exposed to it the most. So that's where my observations are. But people are so interested in a list. Should I put the comma before the and, or should I not?
Is there any punctuation mark that Americans use too much, overuse? For example, in Russia, it's a dash. They say if you don't know what to put in the sentence, put dash. It's a joke.
Since email began, I would guess that there's been a rise in three things. Exclamation points, because people want to be friendly and enthusiastic. There are a lot more ellipses, the dot, dot, dot. When people aren't sure what to write, they often just put dot, dot, dot. And then also the dash, I would say, is another thing. Some people are very dash happy. I overuse, if I don't watch myself, I do overuse dashes and exclamation points because I'm pretty enthusiastic and I do like a good dash. But it's like, as long as you know your weakness and you kind of manage it before you hit the send button, I think it's fine.
I have heard that you shouldn't put a period after you say hi because it sounds very like a person who is writing is not in a very good mood. Hi.
If I'm writing to my clients and they think that I'm a very grumpy person, that's probably not great for my business. So I now do, and also the other issue with that, the comma before the name. I grew up doing hi, being used to hello, comma, name, or hi, comma, name. And I can't do hi, comma, Sue, comma. That would be ridiculous. So then I now just do hi, Sue, comma, and that's what I find is most common in New York with email. And so I'm adaptable. I can change. But I also think sometimes people are too strict about it. For example, people say on the one hand, don't put too many exclamation points in work communication because it looks unprofessional. But I think most people, if they got a message that said, I loved your presentation, triple exclamation point, they would be happy, not say, oh, that person's a bad punctuator. So there's also even variety with that.
So you travel all around the United States with your grammar table, and I wanted to ask you about the difference in attitude towards language in different states. For example, what kind of questions people ask in New York, and what kind of questions people ask in Alaska?
Let's see. What did I? Yeah, there are a lot of similarities. The biggest variety, the biggest departure I think that I saw was when I headed into the American South. I'm always hesitant to generalize too much based on my experiences because I feel one has to be very responsible about sample size. So even though I've spoken to thousands of people, I'm always on a particular, in one state, I'm on one street corner in one town, and the people who come up to me are the people who want to come up to me. So it's already it's not a random sample exactly. But I can tell you that in the South, I got asked a question that I probably wouldn't be asked in New York, which was where to put the apostrophe in y'all, like the second person pronoun, Y apostrophe ALL. So is it, some people put YA apostrophe LL, but it's actually right after the Y because it's a contraction of you all. Since we don't really use that in New York very much, I never say y'all. I can't say y'all. I'm saying it now and I feel weird. Hi, y'all. Can't do it.
I will tell you a fun fact about apostrophe in Russian language, about the word apostrophe, because this word came to Russian language from French language, and that's why it's stressed on the last syllable. So it's apostrophe in Russian language. According to the rules, it's in the dictionary. But people they can't accept this rule, and they all pronounce, like 90% of people would pronounce apostrophe. So they just reject that rule, and I think with time it will be changed.
Wait, so is it being stressed there because that's where the stress would fall naturally if it were a Russian origin word?
No, since it came from the French language, and in French you have all the words in French are stressed on the last syllable. In Russian language, it's also stressed on the last syllable, apostrophe. But for people, it's more natural to say apostrophe, like apostrophe, and so they just reject that proper pronunciation. That's interesting.
Well, I'm happy that you've prepared me for the future in case I come across the word. I will know what to expect.
Is there any rule, grammar rule, you would like to change in the English language?
Well, there's a punctuation thing that I think is a little problematic and that so many people resist and dislike that maybe if I could wave a wand, um, I would at least suggest reform to it, and that is when you quote a word or phrase at the end of a sentence. Like if I send you a sentence that says, "I heard Richard called Mary a quote um, tiresome rageaholic," then I have to decide whether to put the period or the quotation mark first. The custom in American English is just with periods and commas, with those two specific pieces of punctuation, they always go inside no matter what. In the UK, it would go outside in that case. The period would go outside the quotation marks. And so many Americans hate that rule or don't know it. I would just like to do it the UK way. But, I'm not in charge of these things, so I'm just going to keep going with the flow for now.
Ellen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I feel very happy with what I learned and I will apply it in my future.
It was Ellen Jovin, grammarian, founder of the grammar table, and author of the book Rebel with a Clause.